Had to take a seat. My feet are hurting. Wasn't expecting to stand for so long. So the next section of the presentation focuses on publishing ethics. It's an unfortunate subject that we have to cover. It's growing, the number of cases that we're having to deal with, as the pressures on academics are growing to produce more papers. So we see the number of plagiarism cases, ethics cases growing also. So this is just to remind you of hopefully what you already know. If you've come this far, then this should be second nature to you, because the consequences of going against the scientific ethics code can be quite far-reaching, and you really don't want to discover those personally. So I'll just touch upon some of the types of breaches that we see in ethics, and give you an idea of what some of the consequences can be. I'm not scaremongering, but I think it's just important to point out that most people don't get away with it, and if you don't get found out right away, at some point down the line, you will. So when it comes to ethics abuse, we've all heard about the publish or perish. But with ethics code violations, it really is a case of publish and perish. These ethics rules are not local, specific to geographic regions, to countries. They're accepted practices globally. And the detection is done on a global scale. The ethics are not made up by the publishing companies or the editors of the journals. They're made up by the communities that you are active in, the scientific community, and they've been built up over hundreds of years. They're generally accepted, and that's why when I started I said you should be aware. You really should be aware, because a lot of it is no-brainer. So there's a single ethical standard. I don't believe that Turkey differs in any way, nor does China or the US or any country for that matter. The same rules apply to everybody, regardless of what your scientific stature is, whether you're starting out or whether you're firmly established. They apply to everybody. And they are on the rise. So let's talk about plagiarism. You might think that you're taking a shortcut and you'll benefit by having more papers out there to be cited by more people, and your reputation's going to grow. But if you commit plagiarism, the long-term consequences are not weighed up against those short-term gains. It's considered a serious offense. I mean, the police aren't going to show up on your doorstep or anything like that, cart you off to jail. But your peers, your supervisors, both locally and internationally, they're going to know who you are and what you did, and they're not going to look very favorably on it. It could be that you're removed from your position. There will be a lot of naming and shaming going on, online, offline, people whispering behind your back, just generally not nice stuff to want to deal with. and it's going to really hurt your reputation. So one type of plagiarism is duplicate publication. When you're publishing 2 or more papers without the full cross-reference, sharing the same ideas, discussion points and conclusions. You're slicing and dicing, salami style they call it also, salami publishing. So there's something you need to keep in mind here. We already talked about it. When you're submitting a paper for a new journal, for a new submission to a journal, then you shouldn't be repeating what you've already published, unless you've got something significant to build upon that publication, and in which case you need to reference it. If you've published, this is a question that comes up a lot, if you're publishing in proceedings, if you've submitted an abstract for a conference proceedings, that's fine. You can still submit your paper to a journal, your full paper, but just make sure you tell the editor that you've submitted the abstract for the conference proceedings. As far as language is concerned, it's fine for you to translate your article, but again, you need to reference that. And quite often what you need to do is go through the publishing house who's published your original paper and ask them for permission. And then they will grant you permission or they won't, but in most cases they will, as long as you fully reference where the original publication came from. And if you are submitting other papers, either simultaneously or you're due to, that relate to this in some way, then it's better to make reference to those early on submission. And that includes the translations if you have submitted them simultaneously. So how are we detecting? Well, there's a number of different policing methods that are used. We have invested quite heavily in software. We're using 2 different systems. Turnitin and Authenticate, commonly used software plagiarism detection systems. These are built into the submission software, and they are built to make that first pass. They're not 100% fail-safe, but they at least pull out the most obvious cases and they highlight the ones where there's a question mark. Those detection systems are a collaborative effort, so don't think if you're submitting to publisher A that publisher A's software won't pick up from publisher B. It's all these publishers working together on these systems so that we are able to alert one another. And of course the editors and the reviewers that are seeing your paper, the chances are that if they've seen something like this before, and remember it's in their subject area and they read stuff, that they'll pick it up. If not the editor, if not the reviewers. Once it's gone through and perhaps been published, don't forget that once it's out there for all to see, some of your colleagues might even rat you in. The whistleblowers, people who think that you've done the scientific community a disjustice by plagiarism. We often receive anonymous phone calls and anonymous emails where a case is put forward for plagiarism. And in those cases what happens is we take them seriously and we go to the journal that was mentioned where the other paper was published, and we start that discussion with the editors involved from that journal. And there's an investigation that takes place. We never outwardly, publicly accuse the author of a breach of ethics code, plagiarism, until we are 100% satisfied that they have committed that, because we don't want to ruin people's lives and careers by exposing them. And so quite extensive, I mean, these investigations can go on for months, back and forth, being checked by numerous different people. So again, it comes back to, wasting people's time. But if they are very clear and unanimous that there's a case of plagiarism, it will be made publicly known. And it doesn't matter who you are, like I said, or what your stature is, what your position is. These are a couple of examples of cases where prominent figures, this is a German minister, a baron, who was exposed as having fabricated the results of his work for his PhD thesis. And he was stripped of his title. And it was put out there. This is BBC News. So it's made publicly known, and the press pick up on it. If it's substantial, the press will pick up on it. For us, Science Direct, the platform where we host the content, we don't pull the article, we don't remove it, we label it as being retracted. If it is a clear case of plagiarism, we will put a retraction notice out there. And the reason we don't pull it is because librarians, the university, the institutes are paying for this content. When they pay the subscription money, they are buying a certain amount of content. And if we start pulling that content where there's been a case of plagiarism or for whatever reason, basically we're taking content away from them that they've paid for. But we want to tell them why. So we don't remove it completely, we keep it there. This is part of the naming and shaming. And we put a retraction notice on it. And we put a note on saying why it's being retracted. So anybody who's doing a search and looking for literature to further their research, if they come across your article in their search results, this is what they'll see if you've committed plagiarism and you've been found out. So it goes on and on and on for years and years and years, and you're never cleared. They're not going to forget. It's not going to fade away. Another thing that counts as plagiarism and a breach of ethics is the manipulation of figures. So it's not just text. People aren't just looking at titles and results and picking up on the text that's been duplicated. We're also looking at how figures and data are manipulated. There's been quite a few cases recently in economics where the data that has been supplied or not supplied, supplied on request, was not able to be replicated. And so that again is a breach. With figures, the manipulation, so by enhancing, obscuring, removing, introducing new data into a figure that you've taken from someone else's work. I mean, it's fine for you to take somebody else's figure and ask for permission and cite them, but if you take that figure, you don't cite them, you manipulate it and you take it as your own, then you're committing plagiarism. Tweaking the brightness or tweaking the contrast or introducing a new color, that's not plagiarism, but it's good to know what the differences are. Like I was saying, fabrication of results, of data, again, serious case. The data that you use is the backbone of your research, of your publication. And so it's important that that is genuine, that it can be replicated if needs be. And in some fields, it's actually extremely dangerous to publish data and pass it off as being legitimate, because there will be, like for example in the medical field, examples where people will try to reconduct those experiments or use a certain drug. And if that information has been fabricated, those can lead to disastrous results. Yeah, the order has moved around a bit on this. This is going back to the very beginning, kind of switching over here from that doom and gloom of plagiarism and going to jail fast. When you're thinking about your paper and thinking about the journal that you're submitting to, think about the community, think about the audience, the reader who's going to want to read your paper. Is it just your community? Is it an interdisciplinary community? Who do you want to reach? That's also going to determine your choice of journal, your choice of paper, the way in which you present your results. It's important to know what other publications are out there. So if you've identified your audience, identify what they're publishing, what they're referencing. And that should also be a cross-check back to what you're putting into your own paper. And again, is it local, is it international? If you're submitting to an international journal, it's fine for you to focus in on local research, local results, but you need to put it into context also. I know that although I didn't understand everything that was being said by the editor, that he was making reference to, you know, who gives a damn about manufacturing in Turkey. You need to put that into context for that international audience. It is important what's happening in your country. On a global scale, people look to other countries to see what the effects of policy changes were or what the effects were of a particular experiment, but it's important to put it into context also. That's going to help you choose the right journal. Another place that you can go to for choosing your journal is Scopus. Compare the performance of the journals using the rankings by journal. Another alternative to using impact factor alone. We'll touch on that in a little bit. And if I can't say something often enough, read the Guide for Authors as often as you can. So we're just going to move on to the second presentation about the reviewing process. This one's not so long, you'll be glad to hear. Try and get through it a little bit quicker. It's touching on a lot of the things that I've been talking about so far, maybe a little bit more specific in areas. Hopefully also useful. Going to look at the publishing cycle, the kind of innovations that are happening now, specific to Elsevier, but also specific to the publishing landscape in general, the trends that we're seeing, the peer review process, again, how to choose the right journal. Maybe we can skip that. I think that message has gotten across already, and some bibliometrics. It might interest you to know in terms of, you know, what do we do? What does a company like Elsevier do? Do they just sit back and count the cash, do nothing, get all these editors and reviewers to do the work? Well, there's a lot going on behind the scenes. If you think about it, Elsevier alone is dealing with 800,000 new submissions on a yearly basis, nearly 1 million a year. And that's growing exponentially. We're managing the peer review process. We're helping editors and reviewers to edit and for authors to prepare their work, providing them with guidelines and tools, and we have the production system. We make the articles suitable for online publication and make sure that they're available in years to come. We're disseminating that knowledge, making sure that anybody in the world, from wherever they're able to access the internet, that they can read the publications that we're publishing. We're archiving them. We're making sure that the platforms that we are hosting the content on are available in years to come. This is often asked, how do you make sure that what happens if Elsevier disappears tomorrow, that this content is going to be available? Well, we have taken measures to make sure that the content is available and to make sure that the systems are up and running 24/7 and that that content is always there and it's stable and accessible. We have around 7,000 main editors on our journals, of which we have about 2,600 at the moment and growing yearly. We add about 20 new journals a year in various different subject areas, some subject areas growing faster than others, and where we see new opportunities, we jump on them, we start new journals. We're still doing that. We have around 1,000 new editors joining every year, and we have around about 70,000 editorial board members, so those will be at the second and third tier, associate editors, co-editors. And we're dealing with 300,000 reviewers and making sure that the 1.5 million reports that they're submitting every year are going through that submission system. It's a stable system, it's retrievable, and that they have the tools to make the job easier for them. There's a lot of work in that, and the technology that's behind it is so very important. The investments that are made there are so very important. We need to continue to improve upon the submission systems. We're already working on a new, fully custom-made submission system, EVISE, which we've already rolled out to about 80 journals, with many more to follow this year. We've been improving it for the last 4 or 5 years, based on the feedback from the community, from the authors, from the editors who've actually been using it in a live environment, and making sure that the submission system is the best submission system it can be, that the start to finish experience for the author, for the editor, for the reviewer is costing them the least amount of work and effort, and that it's a seamless process where anything that is submitted there can be retrieved easily by numerous people. We're also archiving a lot of most of that work has been done, the journal back files. I was told once that that whole exercise of capturing the print issues of all the journals that hadn't yet been put online, it took about 4 years in total, and they said that if you were to stack all of those manuscripts on top of one another, it would equal 30 times the Empire State Building in terms of height and volume of manuscripts, of what has been scanned and digitized and made available. In many cases back to Volume 1, Issue 1, and Elsevier has been around now for about 140 years, so, you know, do the math. There's a lot of issues and papers in there. And all of that has been digitized. Huge investment, huge amount of work. The platforms, and now we're looking more to mobile content. How do we make sure that you can access the content in the format that you want to receive it in? So perhaps you're not sitting behind your desk. Perhaps you're in the train. You've got a half hour. and you don't want to look on Facebook. You don't want to look on YouTube. Maybe you want to, do a little bit of research, pick up some papers, but you don't want to receive it on your phone in the format that you're receiving it on your PC or your laptop. So there's a lot of investment going into investing in the development of mobile content and making sure that people get the content in a format that they can absorb at any time of day, whatever task they're completing. Because you're not doing the same thing 24 hours a day. So your needs are going to change, and the format has to change with it. So there's a lot of investment going in there. So a lot of the innovation that we're involved in is on the actual publication process. The journals are not what they used to be. They're not arriving on your doorstep every month and you run out with glee to pick them up and sit for the rest of the day on the toilet and read them page to page, frantically, looking at who the first article was from, because of course they're the most important if they're the first in the sequence. It doesn't work like that anymore, so we have to continuously innovate and make sure that the publication process is compatible with the digital age in which we are now all working in. The peer review system, it's a cyclical thing that we see, the criticism that it receives. Every now and again that discussion flares up. People want to see alternatives. We've looked at alternatives. But at the end of the day, nobody has come up with anything yet that matches what the peer review system does now. But we're open to suggestion. We've been trying different things, so this is one of the areas that we're hoping to continue to invest and to develop. How people are accessing, text mining, smart content. Elsevier is now positioning itself not as a publishing company, but as a technology company. Big data is important to us. We have so much content that it would be stupid to just let it sit there and not do anything with it. So there's a lot of investment and advancement being made there. And combining those data and hopefully coming up with breakthroughs, some even based on data that was collected 80 years ago, maybe even longer. Using technology today to make breakthroughs for the future. We're looking at the type of articles, how they're presented. We're able to bring in third-party connections. We have something now called the Article of the Future, focused very much on the digital presentation and how people are absorbing information in the digital age through their laptops, through their PCs. You're no longer reading an article from top left to bottom right. How you're absorbing information is very different. You're being bombarded from so many different angles, from so many different sources on a daily basis. Read this, read this, read this, this is important, this is... Keeping up with social media. How do you make sense of it all? Are you able to absorb 40 pages of a manuscript in the same way that you were maybe 40 years ago when you were reading it on your toilet after it arrived on your doorstep? It's not the same. So the use of images, of graphical abstracts, interactive sources of information, Google Maps, for example, these are all being incorporated into the Article of the Future and making the article more interactive, more dynamic, and easier to digest so that you grasp what that article is trying to say in a shorter space of time and using the technology that's available. The graphical abstract is very important in some fields. Chemistry, life sciences, we're seeing it used a lot. Not so much in economics. but quite often this is where, instead of the abstract, the actual written abstract, this is where most people are making the assessment of reading further. They can grasp so much more information from this than they were from that 300-word abstract. You're able to interact with it. There are individualized entry points. And you're taking full advantage of those online capabilities. Again, just touching on something we discussed earlier, the audio and visual. If you've got 2 minutes from the author telling you what his motivation was, what his results were, and what the conclusions were, rather than you spending a few hours trying to read through that article and absorb that information, then you're able to work further doing other stuff. So the visual and the audio is becoming more and more important. Another thing that we're focused heavily on now is something called article transfer service. And the idea behind this is that we make the journey from one journal to the next, if you have been rejected, a smoother one, a quicker one. When you think that there are between 40 and 90%, depending on the subject area, of articles being rejected from their first choice of journal, but ultimately being published somewhere else. Maybe it was a first-tier journal that they tried to get into and they ended up in a third or a fourth. We still think that that article is valuable. What we don't want to do is lose it to our competitors. We want to make sure that it stays within Elsevier. And we've got enough journals in all tiers to accommodate that. So what we've done is we've incorporated a transfer system within the submission systems that allows the author and the participating journals to transfer rejected manuscripts seamlessly from one journal to the next. You don't have to go back out, resubmit, go into another publisher, go into another submission system, work out how it works, resubmit all your information. It transfers it from one to the next. And in some cases where there have been reviewer reports, if the editors agree and the reviewers agree, those reviewer reports will be transferred as well, lifting some of the burden off the reviewer pool that's available, and also for the editors of the second or the third journal that the article is being passed on to. We think this is a service to the author. It's always offered to the author. They choose. Do they want to participate in this? Do they want to take advantage? Yes or no. If they don't, they're free to go. But we think that for many authors, this is a good alternative. If they don't get into their first journal of choice, there are other options available. We'll make it easier for you to transfer. Another thing that has become increasingly important within scholarly communication is social media. It's no longer just about publishing. It's also about publicizing. You want to make sure that your article is having the biggest impact possible. And social media is one of those things that it's here to stay. I was speaking with the editor at lunch and he said, well, he received a statistic that most students nowadays are spending 4 hours of their day on social media platforms. Now we can think that we can go around that, or we can try and go up against that, but if you can go to the places where these students are going, or whoever you want to reach is going, and get them picking up your article there, why wouldn't you? It makes sense, right? But you need to think about the way that you're presenting your article on social media. It's not the same as presenting it in the journal on a scientific publisher's platform. Your audience is going to be different. Their attention span is different. You need to think about what's going to capture their attention. And the other thing is that if your paper has perhaps a potential societal impact, or its potential for changing policy, you want to make that available to the wider public. This is the kind of stuff that the journalists are picking up. They're putting it into the newspapers. But the journalists nowadays are going into our systems like Science Direct, and they're cherry picking. What we've devised is a new service. It's called STM Digest. Started in January. And what we're doing is providing lay summaries of original research that has a potential societal impact or policy focus. And we're providing those lay summaries on the social media platforms and our own reference manager and collaboration platform, Mendeley, so that we bring the lay summaries into contact with not just people in your own discipline, but those in neighbouring disciplines, and lower that language threshold for people to start discussing perhaps where they could start collaborating. And for the wider public, we're using the social media buttons from Mendeley and from Science Direct to get it out onto the likes of Twitter and Facebook, and put it out there in the format, changing the title slightly, putting it out in that lay format that's freely accessible to all, that people can understand. And that we're providing as a service to the authors. Social media is becoming more and more important, and you need to start thinking about that as well when you're submitting your journal article. What is going to be the impact of this? Not just in terms of the citations you're going to receive to that article, but also thinking about it in terms of altmetrics. Who's picking it up and where are they picking it up? It's not just going to be from the publisher's platform or from the citation databases. This is becoming more and more important, and we need to pay attention to it. If you want to make an impact on a bigger scale, this is where you can do it. Other trends in publishing that we're looking at, I'm sure you've all heard of open access. In terms of trends, this is a deviation from the traditional subscription model, where the librarian, the institution pays, and the author submits free of charge to the journal. Open access, that model is switched around. The author pays on acceptance of the paper, and once published, depending on the licenses that the author has agreed to, that information is freely accessible by everybody. Again, you need to think about accessible, that word accessible. It's out there. There's a lot of government mandates. We've seen that in the UK. We have the Europe 2020 mandate coming up. There's some movement in the United States. I don't know quite what the situation is here in Turkey, but there's a lot of pressure for public-funded research to be made openly available so that the public can access. Well, you need to think also about what the public is able to access. You can put your article out there and make it accessible to all, but let's be honest, how much of the public is going to be able to understand it? Nevertheless, we have more than 100 open access journals, full open access, gold open access, and many of the other journals, more than 600, have the green open access possibility. So that's a delayed embargo period, and that again depends on the subject area. From the time it publishes, it could take maybe 12 months, 6 months, 24 months before that is made publicly available. Very much dependent on the field. We're also compiling virtual special issues, so we can put special issues together thematically, taking them across journals, using the technology that we have, pulling the papers together, bundling them in such a way that we can make them accessible to conferences or a particular research group or whomever. We get often requests to do this. Editor's choice is another thing that we are keen to promote, where the editors select. This is where I was talking before about in the print era, where the order of the contents suggested the prominence of the author. If you're the first, as you open up the issue, if you're the first that appears, then you're the most prominent. Well, this is where editor's choice comes in the digital age. People are searching and accessing the content differently. But if the editor is highlighting and saying, this is some really great stuff, you really need to pay attention to it, then this is a way of highlighting particular papers or particular authors. We're also moving for the majority of journals into an model. The idea behind this is that we have zero shelf policy. So no longer are your papers waiting around for an issue to become available in order to receive the full reference. As the articles are accepted, we're publishing them. It was pretty much also the case for the majority anyway with articles in press, but there all you were getting was the DOI. And although you can cite the DOI, the full reference was still preferred. So now with article-based publishing, as the papers are accepted, we're no longer putting on page restrictions for the journal subscription. We're no longer cutting back when we hit 800 pages or 500 pages and saying, okay, you're finished for this year. Sometimes that was in September. You're finished, you can't publish anymore. It's costing more money. We've opened them up. We've said, you publish what you have, and as soon as it gets accepted, it needs to receive an issue number, a page number, volume number. And that's the goal for the majority of the journals that we work for, so that you get your paper published faster and you have a citable reference faster. You can check online with the guide for authors which of the journals have article-based publishing. It should be made clear in the journal. And I think it's clear for everyone. Personally, you've probably noticed that the pressures are there to publish more. The output that we're seeing on a global scale is that it's increasing year on year. The traditional players, such as the US, Western Europe, Japan, are remaining stable. The US is by far still the largest contributor. But the growth is practically zero. We're seeing the number of publications coming from there gradually decreasing. And then when we look to where we are seeing an increase, Turkey's there, it's seeing close to 10% growth. And countries such as China, who have really, over the last 5 to 10 years, are starting to catch up with the likes of the US. The quality is improving. Where 10 years ago we were very wary about the publications being submitted by Chinese authors, we're seeing vast improvements in the quality. The services that they're taking advantage of in terms of getting papers translated, the accessibility that they have to the scientific literature has been improved. They have everything, they have access to everything. We're seeing the quality improving as well. And so Western Europe, the US, really are starting to look over their shoulder at who's starting to catch up. The quality's improving, the output's improving. People are no longer choosing to remain for their full career in the likes of the US or Western Europe. They're returning to their country of origin, and that's where some great research is coming from. So, not because I think I need to justify myself, but I do think that I have a role, and I do think that Elsevier and other publishers, be that the commercial publishers or the learned societies who publish journals, have a role to play. There are huge amounts of publications being produced every year. It's increasing. It will continue to increase. we need to make sure that we have reliable technology in place to register, to account for that output. We need to provide certification for the authors, for the journals, for people who are involved in the process, backing it up with the tools that we have, the kind of technology that we have in place to make those checks possible. We're making sure that your work is being disseminated globally, that it's available globally, that we continue to expand the dissemination, and that your work is not only available now, this year, next year, but also 100 years from now. We're making sure that we provide the right kind of formatting, the right kind of environment for your audiences to use the information effectively, so that the work that you're producing is being picked up, it's visible, it's being recognized, you're receiving the credit for it. That is all being tracked, and that information is flowing back to your institution, to your departments, to your countries. All of that is very significant. Providing that information is not insignificant. With peer review, we continue to challenge the status quo. We have asked on many occasions people involved in the peer review process, either as reviewer, an editor, or an author, for their ideas, their suggestions about alternatives, ways to improve the system. We're experimenting with different types of peer review, one of those being post-publication, publishing reviewer reports next to articles on Science Direct, making them available, making sure that it is a transparent process. It's slow in the uptake. People are keen to criticize, quick to criticize, but coming up with alternatives is very difficult. It's a system that's been in place for many years, and it's not easy to think of something that can replace it and maintain the kind of standards, because they are very high standards. And in some cases it goes wrong, but those are few and far between. And so we continue to experiment there and to think with the communities that we serve and come up with alternatives. But I think, if anything, what we do acknowledge is that the reviewers are a very, very valuable commodity. We need to treat them well. When we're an author, we need to think about not wasting their time. Make sure that, as a publisher, we provide them with tools that can help them. Make sure that they have the kind of plagiarism detection software that saves them time. Someone was asking me during the break whether it's their fault if they fail to detect when a paper has been plagiarized. If you're a reviewer and you fail to detect that a paper has been plagiarized, of course it's not your fault. It's the author's fault. It's always the author's fault. And they're very sneaky. And if it comes back further down the line, 10 years, 5 years, 6 months, that you slipped up as a reviewer, you didn't notice, nobody's going to blame you, point the finger, nobody. Because the pressures that are there and the task that you have to perform is it's astounding. The amount of papers that are being reviewed and the time that it is asking people to commit to. We need to be very wary of that. And one of the things that we as publishers do is just try to help, but we never try to prejudice. We're never selecting reviewers. That's something that the editors do. You can volunteer to be a reviewer. You still ultimately have to be selected, but the publisher generally will not get involved in that process. They have no say. There's nobody who's going to look at the reviewer reports from the publisher and say, No, this guy sent me a really bad email last year. So although 3 reviewers have said, yes, publish, I don't want you to publish this. I don't like this guy. Nobody's going to do that. So we're trying to facilitate the process. We hope that we've done that. We continue to improve upon that, and we welcome suggestions for further improvement. The principles of peer review being that everybody knows what peer review is, right? We know what the basics are, the fundamentals. You can contest that, but those fundamentals are the same now as they were 150 years ago. If we don't have a peer review system, whatever form that may take, there is no control. It becomes a very subjective process. And there are many journals out there who still decide subjectively on who they're publishing. Not mentioning names, but it does happen, and I'm sure some of you know. But we have to have some kind of objective review there, and this is the best that we have. And yes, journal editors ultimately have the final say. They take advice from the reviewers, but at the end of the day, their name is on the journal, and they're ultimately responsible for what gets published in that journal. They take that responsibility. They take the responsibility off of the shoulders of the reviewer. So yes, coming back to the question of, are you responsible if you fail to detect a plagiarism case? That would be the editor in some format taking some of that responsibility, not the reviewer. And why do you even want to be a reviewer? Why? What do you get out of it? Well, there's a lot of, I think, again, this is our perspective. We think that you can get a lot out of it. What's required of you from your community, from your role as a member of the academic community, is that it's a duty that is to be performed. It's generally accepted that everybody has to do it. You want to get on the ladder. Another thing that we do consider when you're looking at potential editors, we're also looking at the journals that they review for or have reviewed for in the past, whether they're an associate editor on the boards. And that experience, that is counted towards becoming eventually a co-editor or main editor on the journal. So it's valuable. What can you take from it? Well, you're getting the research as it's coming out. You know, you're the first to see it before it's even published. You're able to see what new developments are coming along. It's great for expanding your own knowledge in the field. Helps with your own research and your own ideas. Career development, like I said, it's on most CVs of people in the research community. If you're not listing the journals that you're reviewing for, then something's missing. You should get busy and start reviewing, because it is looked at. You become aware of research before your peers. It gives you that edge, because you generally have an interest in the area, and you're able to start building a relationship with the editors and the authors, if that's the kind of reviewing system they have, on that journal. And again, that can in turn pay back later when you're invited to become an editor on that board. So we've done a lot of surveys, and we want to know what makes them rock and what doesn't. We want to make sure that we're identifying pain points and trying to address them. But overwhelmingly, even though you'll hear everybody complaining about reviewing, what we have heard, well, this is what the survey said, 86% of the reviewers that we surveyed said that they did enjoy reviewing. That 73% said that the technological investments and software that was provided by the publishing house has helped them in that process. So it is valued that we continue to improve that. that formal training is important. A lot of people don't receive it. We are building what we're calling the Publishing Campus, to be released in April, where there are a series of modules available with certification. One of those is reviewing, tips and tricks, and a lot of nice, short modules on how to get published, how to be a reviewer, etc., etc. So we're providing that training where it's been asked for. And that's answering this last request that there was no formal training. People are hearing word of mouth and learning as they go along. And so the things that we're doing now are addressing those concerns, and we do listen and we do pay attention. Usually, and this is again, it's an average, the reviewers spend between 4 and 6 hours reviewing manuscripts. The time it takes them to actually accept the invitation and provide the report, the majority will return within 1 month. There are different motivations for different reviewers. There's been a lot of study done on this, one recently by one of my own editors-in-chief of the Journal of Public Economics, where he found, and this was one of the suggestions, that if we pay reviewers, the likelihood of them submitting on time would increase. Actually, it didn't. The one reason, the main reason for them submitting on time was when they were given a tight deadline, not a long deadline, a tight deadline, and that they would return the review within that deadline, more than when they were offered a cash remuneration or a longer deadline to return. So there are different, cultural influencers from different parts of the world. People will be motivated by different things. In some cases, we do pay reviewers. In some cases, we don't. We decide on that on a journal-by-journal basis. And I have 3 or 4 journals in my portfolio where we do pay reviewers. And I can tell you, it hasn't really improved performance. And really, it's just about, trying something out and seeing whether it works. And a lot of the time, when we are making payment, reviewers will say to us, forget about it, it's not necessary, or can you give it to this charity or that charity or whatever. But it's interesting to see what motivates reviewers to return the manuscript. So we've already covered this. So just rounding up now, looking for the best journal to submit to. Look at your own references. What are you reading? What are the people reading that you've been referencing? Look at those papers, look at the format, look at the keywords, look at the kind of papers that did make it through publication. Look at the aims and scope of the journal. If you got enough results, is it enough to present in a full original research format? Is it a peer-reviewed journal? Now, there are many journals out there still that are not peer-reviewed. And again, you have to ask yourself, what are you putting on your CV? People are going to look at that. What is the takeaway that they get? Were you looking for a quick win? Or did you actually do due diligence and make sure that your paper could be the best that it could be, and that you went through the peer review process and you got it done and published in a journal that is recognized, has an impact factor, has reputable editors, and that those results will be available next week. Look at the audience. Make sure that you tailor it to your audience. Does it have an impact factor? Are you aiming too high, maybe? I mean, there's nothing wrong with aiming high. But is it really worthy, quality-wise, yet? Are you going to go through the process of getting rejected? Taking more time to go through that process to resubmit again? Maybe it's better to aim at the right level first and increase your chances of getting published sooner. Impact factor isn't everything. Keep that in mind, but it does give you an indication of the kind of quality that they're expecting. And don't gamble by salami slicing your research and submitting to different journals, because they will find out and they won't be happy. Other indicators to look at outside of the impact factor. Impact factor is provided by Thomson Reuters. They also produce the eigenfactor. Impact factor is based on a 2-year publication window, eigenfactor 5. Scopus has its own journal ranking and individual ranking, SJR, SNP, H-index. It's important to look at both and decide based on those rankings, but not those rankings alone, whether the journal is suitable for you. Impact factor, I'm assuming most of you know how it's calculated, but for those who don't, so it's the average number of citations that an article receives over a 2-year period within that journal. So if the impact factor is 2.2, then the average number of citations is 2 per article. So they're looking at the number of papers published in the journal and the number of citations within that 2-year space. You need to also keep in mind about making comparisons. Impact factor is very subject related. It's not weighted across subject areas. So if you're in mathematics and somebody's comparing you to your life science colleague who's published in a life science journal with 3 times the impact factor, and you must be really bad if your impact factor of your journal was a lot less, that doesn't say anything. We have different citation behavior for different subject areas, and nobody should be comparing one subject area to another based on impact factor. It has no significance. Eigenfactor, again, it's from Thomson Reuters. It's looking at a longer publication window. It's across that 5-year. Self-citations excluded. And there is some weighting that's being applied across the journals that are being cited. It's important to also keep in mind that with these kind of ranking systems, that there is foul play, that you can influence a number or your impact factor based on the number of papers being published in the journal. Self-citations, some editors even asking authors who are submitting to the journal that they have to cite that journal before they'll be accepted. When ISI, when Thomson Reuters hears about these kinds of practices, they will remove the journal from their impact factor base. Again, this comes down to ethics, and they do have algorithms in place, detection software to see when someone is playing the system. And we have also removed editors who've been playing the system. And we find out quite quickly when they do. So you can manipulate, but you can manipulate for a small period of time and you get found out. So it's always good to keep in mind how the impact factor is calculated. And don't let that be the only factor to determine where you publish. SJR from Scopus, oh no, sorry, from, yeah, it is from Scopus. Getting tired now, sorry. So it's similar to the impact factor. It has a 3-year window. Self-citations limited. It's an alternative. I'm not going to say one is better than the other. You can make a guess at which one I might think might be better than the other, but I'll leave that to you to decide. You can get that information freely available. SNP, again from Scopus, source normalized impact per paper. It's also weighting out across subject areas. This is one that you can compare across subject areas. So it looks at someone in mathematics and ranks them the same way as someone from life sciences based on the input, the output, and the journal that they're publishing in. H-index is based on the individual, has some limitations based on point in someone's career that they are. This is one of the things I do look at when I'm looking for editors, new editors for the journal. I will look at the H-index. It won't be the only reason I'll choose somebody, but I do make it as a comparison. I'm also looking, of course, at what stage of someone's career they're in and taking that into consideration. Having the highest H-index doesn't mean that you're going to make a great editor. But I do want to see that what you've published has received citation, that you're reputable. So it's used in many different ways. And you can use Scopus to check the H-index. Go check out your own H-index. You can use Scopus to do that. Check out your co-authors. It's interesting to play around with some of the tabs in Scopus when you get into this kind of, you know, granular information about individuals. That was it. Thank you very much. I hope you're still awake.
Çok teşekkür ederiz. Eğer sorularınız varsa Türkçe ya da İngilizce olarak sorabilirsiniz. Türkçeleri ben çevirebilirim. Şu mikrofonu Dilar'cığım.
My name is Mehmet. Thank you very much for your informative presentation. My question is, who is primarily responsible to make in a review process?
Bir daha söyler misiniz?
Who is primarily responsible to make a plagiarism analysis in a review process? Editor
who's primarily
or
responsible for making the plagiarism analysis?
Yes, who is primarily responsible?
So there are a number of detection points in place. I wouldn't say that any one person is primarily responsibility. I would that it's anyone's primary responsibility. It's a collective effort. So from the publisher's perspective, we provide the software, the detection software, the editors who are receiving the submission. Quite often, you have to remember that these are also people that are reading the literature in that subject area. So quite often they will pick it up first. If not, they then have 2 or 3 reviewers who will be looking at the paper, and potentially, if that paper had been submitted elsewhere, there's a very high chance that it could be the same reviewer who reviewed the paper for a different journal. We've seen that happen. Ultimately, the responsibility lies on the author for not doing it in the first place. And if they do, and it goes undetected by the journal, and further down the line, somebody exposes the article as being plagiarized, then nobody's really pointing the finger. I think in the past there's been a general finger pointing at the system of peer review for it being unreliable. They will point the finger at the editor-in-chief. But it's impossible that 100% of the papers being plagiarized will be detected by the editor or the reviewers. But at some point down the line, somebody might pick up on it, whether it be a colleague, a co-author, and it will be exposed. And as a publisher, we don't point the finger in any direction.
Thank you very much.
Başka sorusu olan var mıdır hocam?
Okay, thank you very much. So my question was discussed a little bit in the first session, but I want to know your opinion. And actually, I think there's different opinions from different sides. And I still don't know which is true, which is not. So let's say I published a paper and I want to send my students to a conference so that they can, you know, feel the atmosphere and also publish, tell these results to other people as well. So I tell them, okay, you do some more data and also put up a poster and use maybe the main figure from the original article. So how ethical is this from the side of the publisher? I mean, can I, of course I do reference it both in the abstract book and in the poster, but I'm not sure if using the original article as the figure itself, how okay is that?
If you're submitting to a conference for the conference proceedings, or you're presenting a poster?
So it's just the poster presentation in a conference, and sometimes, you know, the abstract is published, and sometimes it's given even an ISSN number because it's like in the in like the back part of an actual journal, right? So it's only the abstract is published.
Yeah.
And sometimes even it's like in the back of an actual journal, but the poster is put up on a poster session, and I use the figure on the poster and not on the abstract.
I think everything here is explainable. If you can reference it, if you are open when you're submitting your paper to the journal, that you have presented it in abstract format or poster format, and that you're clear and upfront about that, then I think the journal editor will make a decision there and then whether that's fine for their journal or not. I think you'll see differences there, but I think from the publisher's perspective, we're fine with you submitting your paper to a journal if you have presented it for the proceedings of a conference, as long as you cite and are upfront about it when you submit.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mehmet Bey burada mı acaba? Ulak BİM'e ait sorular alınacak mı? Tamam. Sanırım bize soru kalmadı. Teşekkür ederiz. Sağ olun.